Carol called me last fall, I forget in the fall, but I know winter was coming in, and asked me, would you be interested in working on an artist garden at the museum? And I said, of course, I'd love to. And she gave me the context of Harbourfront's artist gardens, and if you've never seen any of those, some lovely raised beds at Harbourfront that they commissioned artists to plant. And I really didn't know what I was going to do, other than I said to Carol, I would like to connect what I do to the collection in some way. McMaster Museum of Art's collection is fantastic, and it's near and dear to my heart. In fact, I really count the fact that I'm an artist to the fact that I live so close to the museum and could come and see a lot of works, especially by the British land artists that they have here in the collection. There's a photographic work by Andy Goldsworthy. So we met in Carol's office, and I said, I want to do something with the collection, and she picked up the Levy Bequest catalog and just flipped it open randomly to the page with the Paul Klee painting. And I said, perfect, that's it. And we high-fived or something, and and then I left, and I'm like, well, that's, fantastic, this is perfect. But I didn't quite know what I was going to do. But I realized at the center, at the heart of my work is trying to resituate nature kind of back again at the core or the heart of culture. I think that at some point, like other aspects of our relationship to the natural world, there's been a kind of a divide or a separation, and I was really interested in, again, making us contemplate how nature and culture and our lives are really one, as opposed to these distinct things. And, in a nutshell, I guess the idea behind the work is that Paul Klee, 1914, went to North Africa and had, as I guess some people would call it, an epiphany, looking at the landscape of North Africa and Tunisia, the way the light, played with the landscape, and that changed his way of working. And he began to work on what some people refer to the kind of magic squares of the rectangular formations on the painting. And the painting in the museum's collection, it has a long name, we'll just call it Untitled, is a very small watercolor, and it looks like it's one, perhaps even at the beginning of this kind of process for him, because it's very loose, the colors bleed, as watercolor does, of course, but the colors bleed into one another, and the squares, rectangles are just less kind of tight, as they seem to be later on in his work, where they're just really much more contained and precise. And I just said, if he was inspired by the landscape to make a painting, a cultural object, I want to take that cultural object and I want to take inspiration from it and just turn it back into the landscape. So that is basically the idea, is I'm going to take the painting and turn it back into a garden. Of course, it's a garden, it's not paint, so some might say it doesn't look at all like the painting, but if you've read my comments about it, it's just the idea of the texture, the colors of the flowers, and of course the colors of the leaves. The piece is called Untilled, and the first time I got a chance to work with Carol was with a two-person show with Dave Hind, a good friend of mine, and I sort of said, why don't we play with the idea of untitled, and we came up with entitled, and that notion of people feel entitled to, even the idea of, this is my property, right, entitled to possessing the landscape. And trying to think of an idea for this title, and titles are important to me. I used to write a lot of poetry, and I think titles are important, and I just saw, what did we use for that other show? Entitled, and then I realized Untilled, which of course the clay work is untitled, and this ground is definitely untilled because it was very difficult to put a shovel into, but I like that. I think digging is something that when I was a kid sort of inspired me, or inspired my artwork. So untilled, I guess future projects, it may become a bit more tilled in the future. And I just wanted to address, once I planted this this canvas here, the garden, I just really wanted to kind of bring it, extend it out. I think gardens, this whole idea of containment is sometimes a little silly. And I was wondering how I would do that, and on my desk at work I have a small book of, it's a little bit of a moldy book, unfortunately, found at a used bookstore, but it's just called Klee's Magic Squares. And I thought, well, why don't I flip through that? And he had this lovely drawing of these just rectangles that overlap and kind of vanish into space. And again, I thought, hey, you know, same source of inspiration, I will use that. So this planting here of this kind of, it's like the grid in the way we often think of with gardens. And it just kind of disappears out into the more shaded area of the space. And ideally, we'll just grow in and kind of, you know, the plants are going to do their own thing. When I cook, I like to give credit to all the vegetables, and I think the same with this work. The plants will be doing the work.
So, if anything edible?
Thank you.